Stephen Thomas felt his heart race as the medical scanner swept over his body. The young Ladosian diplomat, Linux, operated the device with her forearms, her bioluminescent skin casting a soft glow in the dim examination room of the Zeta-9 space station. As the scan reached his lower body, Linux's eyes widened, her skin flashing in rapid patterns of blue and green. "Is everything all right?" Stephen asked, suddenly aware of the tension in the air. Linux's voice quivered as she responded, "Your reproductive organs. They're unlike anything in our anatomy database." Stephen shifted uncomfortably on the examination table, acutely aware of the growing awkwardness between them. He had expected some differences between human and Ladosian physiology, but the intensity of Linux's reaction caught him off guard. The 28-year-old astronaut had arrived on Zeta-9 just hours ago, tasked with negotiating a critical trade agreement for rare minerals found on the Ladosian homeworld. As Earth's representative in this first diplomatic mission, since making contact with the technologically advanced alien race, Stephen knew the stakes were high. Linux's skin continued to pulse with vibrant colors, her forehands fidgeting with the scanner as she struggled to maintain her composure. Stephen could sense her growing arousal, and the realization made him increasingly uneasy. Suddenly, the examination room door slid open. Commander Zurix, a stern-faced Ladosian military leader, entered with two armed guards. "The High Council has ordered an immediate cessation of all physical examinations," he announced, his tone cold and authoritative. Stephen quickly stood up, straightening his uniform. "Is there a problem, Commander?" Zurix's eyes narrowed. "We have concerns about potential biological incompatibilities between our species. New protocols are being implemented to limit physical contact between humans and Ladosians." As Stephen was escorted out of the medical bay, he caught a glimpse of Linux being led away by another group of officials. The young diplomat's skin now pulsed with a deep red hue, a clear sign of her distress. Back in his quarters, Stephen's mind raced. The trade negotiations were set to begin in less than 12 hours, and now he faced not only the challenge of securing a favorable agreement, but also navigating complex interspecies social dynamics. His comm device chirped, signaling an incoming encrypted message. Stephen's breath caught in his throat as he read the urgent communication from Earth Command. "Warning, intel suggests potential Ladosian hostile intent. Gather information on military capabilities. Proceed with caution." Stephen leaned back in his chair, the weight of his new conflicting priorities settling on his shoulders. He had to complete his official mission, manage Linux's inappropriate attraction, and now secretly investigate potential threats to humanity. As he prepared for bed, Stephen couldn't shake the image of Linux's flustered reaction during the examination. He knew that her arousal at the sight of his anatomy could complicate matters further, potentially jeopardizing the entire mission. With a deep breath, Stephen steeled himself for the challenges ahead. He was humanity's representative on this alien station, and he would not let Earth down. As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises awaited him in this strange new world of interstellar diplomacy. Stephen awoke to the soft hum of the Zeta-9 station's life support systems. He blinked away the remnants of uneasy dreams, his mind already racing with the challenges that lay ahead. In just a few hours, he would face the Ladosian High Council for the first round of trade talks. As he prepared for the day, Stephen couldn't shake the memory of Linux's flustered reaction during his medical examination. He hoped her unprofessional behavior wouldn't complicate the negotiations. The council chambers were a marvel of alien architecture, with sweeping arches that seemed to defy gravity and walls that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. Stephen took his seat at the long, curved table, acutely aware of the eyes upon him, some curious, others wary. As the talks began, Stephen noticed Linux seated among the junior diplomats. Her skin flickered erratically whenever their eyes met, a kaleidoscope of colors that betrayed her inner turmoil. Stephen forced himself to focus on the task at hand. "Esteemed members of the High Council," he began, "Earth is eager to establish a mutually beneficial trade relationship with the Ladosian people. Our planet is rich in resources that we believe would be of great value to your civilization." A council member with deep blue skin leaned forward, his four eyes narrowing. "And what exactly do you hope to gain from us, human?" Stephen explained Earth's interest in the rare minerals found on the Ladosian homeworld, carefully emphasizing the potential for technological advancements that could benefit both species. However, his words were met with skepticism and thinly veiled hostility from several council members. "How can we trust that your people won't exploit our resources?" another councilor asked, her skin pulsing with shades of red and orange. "Your physiology is so alien to us. Who knows what other differences might exist between our species?" Stephen fought to keep his expression neutral, recognizing the growing unease about human biology. He attempted to redirect the conversation back to the potential benefits of trade, but cultural misunderstandings continued to hinder progress. As the first day of negotiations drew to a close, Stephen retreated to his quarters, mentally exhausted. He activated his secure communications device, encoding a message to Earth Command. "Day 1 of talks inconclusive," he reported. "Ladosians displaying increasing hostility and suspicion regarding human physiology. Potential for—" A sudden beep from the device cut him off, an unauthorized surveillance signal detected in the room. Stephen's heart raced as he quickly ended the transmission, his eyes darting around the seemingly innocuous alien decor. With practiced nonchalance, Stephen began a thorough search of his quarters, disguising his actions as idle exploration of his temporary home. His fingers traced the contours of strange artifacts and alien furnishings until they brushed against something that didn't belong. Hidden within a decorative Ladosian sculpture, Stephen discovered a tiny camera, its lens barely visible among the intricate patterns. His mind raced as he carefully disabled the device, leaving it intact to avoid alerting his watchers. Earth Command's warnings about potential Ladosian hostile intent echoed in his thoughts. The next morning, Stephen was escorted to a Ladosian research facility for a tour. As they moved through the sterile corridors, his trained eye caught glimpses of advanced weaponry being developed in adjacent laboratories. The sight contradicted everything the Ladosians had said about being a purely peaceful species. Seizing a moment when his guide was distracted, Stephen activated the miniature scanner hidden in his uniform. The device hummed softly as it gathered data on the weapons, but suddenly emitted a sharp whine. A brief electromagnetic pulse rippled through the air, causing lights to flicker and nearby equipment to sputter. "What was that?" The Ladosian guide turned, his skin flashing with alarm. Stephen's mind raced. He stumbled forward, intentionally bumping into a control panel. "I'm so sorry," he exclaimed. "I must have lost my balance. Your gravity settings are still a bit challenging for me." Linux, who had been quietly observing the tour, stepped forward. "It's all right," she assured the guide, her skin pulsing with calming blues. "Human physiology sometimes interferes with our technology. It's nothing to be concerned about." As they left the facility, Linux pulled Stephen aside, her four eyes darting nervously. "Stephen, I must warn you," she whispered, her skin rippling with concern. "Some members of the High Council are pushing to terminate the negotiations. They fear your biology may pose unforeseen risks to our people." Stephen's mind raced, weighing his options. "What can we do?" he asked, careful to keep his voice low. Linux's skin flickered with a mix of apprehension and something else. Excitement, perhaps? "I could help you understand our culture better," she offered. "If we meet privately, I could teach you how to navigate Ladosian social cues. It might help salvage the talks." Stephen hesitated, torn between his mission objectives and his growing trust in Linux. Was her offer genuine or part of a larger Ladosian scheme? "That's very kind of you," he said carefully. "I'll consider it and let you know." As they parted ways, Stephen noticed Commander Zrix observing them from a distance, his expression unreadable. The weight of Earth's fate seemed to press down on Stephen's shoulders as he made his way back to his quarters. That evening, Stephen's secure comm device chirped with another encrypted message from Earth Command. His blood ran cold as he read the new intelligence. The Ladosians might be planning to use the trade negotiations as cover for a preemptive strike against Earth. Stephen's orders were clear. Gather concrete evidence of any Ladosian military plans while continuing to pursue the trade agreement. As he processed this new information, Stephen realized the true complexity of his mission was only beginning to unfold. He stared out the viewport at the alien stars, feeling more isolated than ever before. Tomorrow, he would return to the negotiating table, armed with new knowledge and growing suspicions. He would have to navigate the hostile Ladosian political landscape, manage his complex relationship with Linux, and somehow uncover the truth behind the Ladosians' true intentions. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and Stephen Thomas was the only one who could tip the scales. Stephen's heart raced as he made his way to the secluded meeting spot he'd arranged with Linux. The corridors of Zeta 9 seemed to stretch endlessly, each step echoing in the emptiness. Finally, he arrived at a small observation deck, tucked away from the station's main thoroughfares. Linux was already there, her bioluminescent skin casting a soft glow in the dimly lit room. As Stephen approached, he noticed her skin pulsing with increasing intensity, shifting through a spectrum of colors he hadn't seen before. "I'm glad you came," Linux said, her four eyes fixed on Stephen. "There's so much I need to tell you about our people." For the next hour, Linux revealed crucial information about Ladosian biology and culture. She explained their unique mating rituals, describing how the pulsing patterns of their skin played a vital role in attraction and bonding. Stephen listened intently, realizing how valuable this knowledge could be for his diplomatic mission. "Our reproductive process is unlike anything in your database," Linux continued, her skin now pulsing with a deep violet hue. "We require a third party to act as a catalyst for fertilization." Stephen's mind reeled at the implications. "That's fascinating," he said, carefully maintaining his composure. "How does that affect your social structures?" As Linux delved deeper into Ladosian society, Stephen found himself drawing parallels to human cultures. He began to see how he could use this information to bridge the gap between their species. Suddenly, a deafening alarm blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the observation deck, casting eerie shadows across Linux's now pale skin. "What's happening?" Stephen shouted over the noise. Linux's eyes widened in fear. "We're under attack!" The station shuddered violently, throwing them both off balance. Stephen grabbed Linux's arm to steady her, feeling the tremors of her skin beneath his fingers. "We need to evacuate," he said, already moving towards the exit. As they raced through the corridors, explosions rocked the station. Panicked Ladosians streamed past them, their skin flashing in chaotic patterns of fear and confusion. "It's a Ladosian frigate," Linux explained breathlessly as they ran. "Sub-Commander Kraith's faction. They oppose any alliance with humans." Stephen's mind raced. This attack could derail everything they'd worked for. As they rounded a corner, he spotted a computer terminal. "Wait," he said, pulling Linux to a stop. "I need to check something." His fingers flew over the alien interface, his recent crash course in Ladosian technology proving invaluable. "They're targeting the life support systems," he said grimly. "If they succeed, everyone on this station will die." Linux's skin paled further. "What can we do?" Stephen's training kicked in. "I might be able to reroute power and stabilize life support, but I need to get to the control center." Linux nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll get you there." As they navigated the damaged corridors, they encountered a group of injured Ladosian civilians. Without hesitation, Stephen knelt beside them, applying his knowledge of first aid. "The pressure on this wound needs to be constant," he instructed a trembling Ladosian as he fashioned a makeshift tourniquet. "Keep it elevated." Linux watched in awe as Stephen moved from one injured Ladosian to another, his actions sure and compassionate. The other Ladosians present murmured among themselves, their perception of the human shifting before their eyes. "We need to keep moving," Stephen said, standing up after treating the last of the wounded. "There will be more who need help if we don't stop this attack." As they approached the control center, they heard the heavy footsteps of security forces. Commander Zrix's voice boomed through a communication device. "Find the human and bring him to the command center immediately." Stephen and Linux exchanged a look. "Sounds like they need your help," Linux said, a hint of pride in her voice. They burst into the control center, Stephen immediately assessing the situation. Ladosian engineers worked frantically at their stations, their skin flashing with stress and fear. "Let me help," Stephen said, stepping up to a console. The engineers hesitated, looking to their superiors for guidance. Linux intervened, her skin pulsing with authoritative colors. "This human has knowledge that could save us all. Let him work." As Stephen's fingers danced across the alien controls, interfacing human engineering principles with Ladosian technology, the engineers watched in fascination. His innovative approach began to stabilize the failing systems. Suddenly, another explosion rocked the station. Warning lights flashed as a hull breach was detected in their section. "We're losing atmosphere," an engineer shouted. Stephen's mind raced. He spotted a piece of Ladosian technology he recognized from his earlier tour. "I have an idea," he said, grabbing the device, "but I'll need your help to implement it." Working together, Stephen and the Ladosian engineers combined human ingenuity with alien tech to create a temporary seal. As the immediate danger passed, a tense silence fell over the control center. Commander Zrix strode in, his eyes immediately locking onto Stephen. "The rogue frigate has been neutralized," he announced, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "But our defenses are severely damaged." As the implications of the attack sunk in, Stephen realized that the real challenge was just beginning. The Ladosian High Council would be convening to decide the future of human-Ladosian relations, and he would need to testify. Linux approached him, her skin now pulsing in a pattern he recognized from their earlier discussion, one of deep emotional connection. "Stephen," she said softly, "I need to tell you something before you face the council." As Linux began to speak, Stephen felt the weight of his mission, his growing feelings for Linux, and the fate of human-Ladosian relations converging into a singular, crucial moment. Whatever happened next would shape the course of interstellar diplomacy for generations to come. "Come." Stephen took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The High Council chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, its vaulted ceilings adorned with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in harmony with the Ladosian skin. Stephen felt every eye in the room upon him as he stepped forward to address the assembly. The weight of Earth's future pressed down on his shoulders, but he stood tall, drawing strength from his experiences on Zeta 9. "Esteemed members of the High Council," Stephen began, his voice steady despite the tension in the air, "I stand before you today not just as a representative of Earth, but as someone who has lived among you, worked alongside you, and come to understand the true potential of our two species working together." He went on to detail the technological advancements they could achieve through collaboration, the cultural exchange that could enrich both societies, and the mutual defense benefits of an alliance. The Ladosians listened intently, their skin flickering with a mix of colors that Stephen had learned to interpret as interest and cautious optimism. Just as Stephen felt he was making headway, the chamber doors burst open. Commander Zrix strode in, his posture rigid and his eyes fixed on Stephen with an intensity that made the human's blood run cold. "Honorable Council," Zrix announced, his voice booming through the chamber, "I bring evidence of deception and espionage committed by this human representative." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Stephen's heart raced as Zrix produced the disabled surveillance device he had found in his quarters and a data crystal containing the information gathered from the weapons facility. "This human has been gathering intelligence on our defenses and technology," Zrix declared, his skin flashing with accusatory hues. "He cannot be trusted." The chamber erupted into chaos. Ladosian officials shouted over one another, their skin pulsing with angry reds and alarmed yellows. Several called for Stephen's immediate arrest, while others demanded the termination of all human-Ladosian relations. Stephen opened his mouth to defend himself, but before he could speak, a familiar voice cut through the tumult. "Wait!" Linux stepped forward, her skin radiating a calming blue. "There is more to this situation than you realize." All eyes turned to Linux as she moved to stand beside Stephen. Her proximity sent a wave of conflicting emotions through him. Relief at her support, but also a growing unease. "I was aware of Stephen's intelligence gathering," Linux admitted, her voice clear and unwavering. "In fact, I deliberately provided him with carefully selected information." Stephen stared at her in disbelief, his pupils dilating. The council chamber fell silent, every Ladosian hanging on Linux's words. This was part of a plan to test human trustworthiness and adaptability, she explained. We needed to understand how they would handle sensitive information and whether they could be relied upon in complex diplomatic situations. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Some Ladosians nodded in approval of Lennox's strategy, while others bristled at the deception. Stephen felt as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted. He searched Lennox's face, trying to reconcile this new information with the connection they had shared. As accusations flew between various council factions, Stephen realized he needed to act quickly to salvage the situation. He stepped forward, raising his voice to be heard above the din. "Members of the High Council," he said, his tone firm but respectful. "I understand your concerns and your anger, but I ask you to consider this. Despite having access to sensitive information, Earth has made no aggressive moves against your people. Instead, we have continued to pursue peaceful negotiations and mutual cooperation." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "To demonstrate our commitment to transparency and our value as allies, I am prepared to share information about some of Earth's own technological advancements." This caught the attention of the Council. Even Zrix looked intrigued as Stephen began to outline some of humanity's recent breakthroughs in propulsion technology and energy generation. He was careful not to reveal anything too sensitive, but provided enough detail to show that humans had much to offer as partners. As Stephen spoke, he noticed Lennox watching him intently, her skin pulsing with a complex pattern he couldn't quite decipher. He pushed aside his feelings of betrayal and confusion, focusing on the task at hand. Suddenly, a Ladosian aide burst into the chamber, his skin flashing urgent patterns. He whispered something to one of the council members, whose eyes widened in alarm. "We have just received word from station security," the council member announced, silencing the ongoing debate. "Sub-Commander Kraith's rogue faction is planning a second attack on Zeta 9. Their aim is to destroy the station entirely, eliminating both the human delegation and any Ladosians who support cooperation with Earth." The chamber erupted into panic. Stephen's mind raced, quickly assessing the situation. He caught Commander Zrix's eye and saw a flicker of grudging respect in the Ladosian's gaze. "We need to act quickly," Stephen said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Your technology combined with our tactical knowledge might be the key to stopping this attack." The High Council members exchanged glances, their skin pulsing with rapid-fire communication patterns. Finally, the lead council member spoke. "Despite our reservations, we recognize the immediate threat we face. We hereby authorize a temporary alliance between our forces. Commander Zrix, you will work with the human Stephen to coordinate our defenses." Zrix nodded sharply, then turned to Stephen. "Come," he said brusquely. "We have little time to prepare." As they hurried from the chamber, Stephen felt a hand on his arm. He turned to find Lennox beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of persistence and regret. "Stephen, she began, but he cut her off. "Not now," he said, his voice tight. "We have a station to save." Together they raced towards the command center, the alarms beginning to blare throughout Zeta 9. The station trembled under the first wave of the attack, and Stephen knew that the real test of human Ladosian cooperation was about to begin. As they entered the command center, screens lit up with incoming data on the enemy ships. Stephen's mind was already formulating strategies, combining his knowledge of human battle tactics with what he had learned of Ladosian technology. "Commander Zrix," he said, turning to the Ladosian leader, "I have an idea, but I'll need your trust and full cooperation." Zrix studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Speak quickly, human. Our survival depends on it." Stephen began to outline his plan, a daring combination of Ladosian energy weapons and human-style guerrilla warfare techniques. As he spoke, he saw a glimmer of hope in the eyes of those around him. The battle for Zeta 9 and the future of human-Ladosian relations was about to begin in earnest. Stephen's plan unfolded rapidly as he coordinated with Commander Zrix and the Ladosian forces. "We need to take the fight to them," Stephen explained, gesturing to the tactical display. "A small infiltration team can board Kraith's flagship and disable their weapon systems from within." Zrix's skin rippled with skepticism. "How do you propose we get past their defenses?" By combining your cloaking technology with our stealth tactics, Stephen replied. They won't see us coming. As the plan took shape, Lennox stepped forward. I'll join the infiltration team. My knowledge of Ladosian's ship layouts will be crucial. Stephen nodded, meeting her eyes. Despite his lingering feelings of betrayal, he knew her expertise would be invaluable. Within minutes, a team was assembled. Stephen, Lennox, Zrix, and a group of elite Ladosian operatives boarded a small cloaked shuttle. As they approached Kraith's flagship, Stephen's heart raced. The success of their mission and the future of human-Ladosian relations hung in the balance. The shuttle docked silently with the enemy vessel. Stephen led the way, his movements swift and precise. The team moved through the ship's corridors like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the hum of the engines. Left here, Lennox whispered, her skin pulsing with muted colors. The engineering bay is 2 levels down. They encountered minimal resistance, catching the few guards they met by surprise. Stephen's human combat techniques, so alien to the Ladosians, proved remarkably effective. In the engineering bay, Stephen and Lennox immediately set to work. Stephen's eyes darted across the unfamiliar controls, his mind racing to connect what he saw with his knowledge of human engineering principles. There, he pointed. That's their main power coupling. If we reroute it through this secondary system, we can overload their weapons array. Lennox nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. Brilliant. And if we then disconnect these relays, it'll disable their propulsion as well. As they worked, alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. Zrix's voice crackled over their comms. We've been discovered, holding them off, but not for long. The sounds of energy weapons and shouting echoed through the corridors. Stephen and Lennox redoubled their efforts, knowing time was running out. Almost there, Stephen muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he made the final adjustments. A surge of energy pulsed through the ship, and the weapons systems went dark. Moments later, the low thrum of the engines faded to silence. We did it, Lennox exclaimed, her skin flashing with triumphant colors. Their victory was short-lived. The engineering bay doors slid open, revealing a tall, imposing Ladosian. His skin pulsed with furious, deep reds and violets. Kraith, Lennox breathed, her voice tight with fear. The Ladosian rebel leader raised a strange, pulsing device. You've ruined everything, he snarled, aiming at Stephen. Time seemed to slow. Stephen saw Kraith's finger tighten on the trigger. He braced for impact, but instead felt a solid mass slam into him. Lennox had thrown herself in front of him. The weapon discharged, a blinding burst of energy engulfing Lennox. She crumpled to the floor, her bioluminescence flickering erratically. Rage and anguish surged through Stephen. With a primal yell, he launched himself at Kraith. The Ladosian's extra limbs gave him an advantage, but Stephen's human agility and adrenaline-fueled strength kept him in the fight. They grappled across the engineering bay, crashing into consoles and equipment. Stephen ducked under a swipe from Kraith's lower arms, then drove his fist into the Ladosian's midsection. Kraith stumbled back, gasping. Using the alien environment to his advantage, Stephen vaulted over a bank of controls, putting distance between them. He grabbed a loose piece of equipment, wielding it like a club. Kraith charged, but Stephen was ready. He sidestepped, using the Ladosian's momentum against him. With a resounding crack, he brought the makeshift weapon down on Kraith's arm. The experimental weapon clattered to the floor. Stephen kicked it away, then pressed his advantage. A flurry of strikes, a combination of human martial arts and desperate improvisation, drove Kraith back. The Ladosian rebel, unused to human fighting styles, found himself overwhelmed. With a final, powerful blow, Stephen sent Kraith crashing to the ground. The rebel leader lay still, his skin pulsing weakly with defeat. Panting, Stephen rushed to Lennox's side. Her bioluminescence was faint, barely visible. Drawing on his first aid training, he assessed her injuries. Stay with me, Lennox, he murmured, applying pressure to a wound on her torso. Don't you dare give up now. Commander Zrix burst into the engineering bay, his team securing the room. The ship is ours, he announced, then paused, taking in the scene. We need medical assistance here now. As Ladosian medics swarmed around Lennox, Stephen felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Zrix, the commander's skin pulsing with a mix of concern and respect. "You fought well, human," Zrix said. "Your actions today may have saved us all." Stephen nodded, his eyes never leaving Linux as she was carefully lifted onto a stretcher. "We need to get her back to Zeta 9, he said, his voice hoarse. The journey back to the station passed in a blur. News of their victory spread quickly, and Stephen saw the change in how the Ladosians looked at him, with awe, gratitude, and a newfound respect. In the medical bay, Stephen maintained a constant vigil at Linux's bedside. Her bioluminescence slowly stabilized, the erratic flickering giving way to a steady, if faint, glow. As he watched her, Stephen's mind raced with the implications of what had happened. The battle, Linux's sacrifice, the defeat of Kraith, it all pointed to a new chapter in human-Ladosian relations. But at what cost? Commander Zrix approached, his wounds treated and his posture slightly less rigid than before. "The High Council wishes to speak with you," he said. "They're reconsidering their stance on human-Ladosian cooperation." Stephen nodded, but didn't move from Linux's side. "I'll be there soon," he replied. Zrix hesitated, then added, "Earth Command has also sent a message. They're requesting a full report on Ladosian military capabilities." This caught Stephen's attention. He looked up at Zrix, seeing the unspoken question in the commander's eyes. The future of their two species hung in the balance, and Stephen's next actions would be crucial. Before he could respond, a soft glow caught his eye. Linux's hand was moving, reaching out towards him. Her skin pulsed with a pattern he had come to recognize, one of deep emotional connection. Stephen took her hand, feeling the warmth of her bioluminescence against his skin. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by the Ladosian medical staff nearby, their own skin flickering with surprise and interest. As Linux's eyes fluttered open, Stephen realized that his mission had become far more complex than he could have ever imagined. The battle was won, but the real challenge lay ahead, navigating the intricate web of interspecies politics, his duty to Earth, and his growing feelings for Linux. The future of human-Ladosian relations was bright with potential, but fraught with challenges, and Stephen found himself at the very heart of it all. Stephen stood before the High Council, his posture straight and his eyes steady. The chamber, once a place of tension and distrust, now buzzed with a different energy. The Ladosian counselor's skin pulsed with patterns of curiosity and cautious optimism. "Stephen of Earth," the lead counselor began, his voice resonant in the circular room, "your actions during the recent crisis have demonstrated the potential for cooperation between our species. We hereby appoint you as the official human liaison to the Ladosian government." The announcement sent a ripple of bioluminescent chatter through the assembled Ladosians. Stephen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "I'm honored," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'll do my best to foster understanding and collaboration between our peoples." As Stephen left the council chambers, he found Commander Zrix waiting for him. The Ladosian's skin flickered with a pattern Stephen had come to recognize as grudging respect. "Congratulations on your appointment," Zrix said, falling into step beside Stephen. "I trust you understand the magnitude of your new role." Stephen nodded. "I do, and I'll need your help to navigate the complexities of Ladosian politics and culture." Zrix's skin rippled with agreement. "You'll have it, but be aware, your presence here is already causing changes." As they walked through the station, Stephen noticed what Zrix meant. Young Ladosians they passed stared at him with unconcealed fascination. Some even mimicked his gait, attempting to walk with the same stride as a human. In the following weeks, Stephen immersed himself in his new duties. He spent hours in meetings with Ladosian officials, relaying information to Earth Command, and mediating disputes between the two species. The work was exhausting but rewarding. One evening, as Stephen reviewed trade agreements in his quarters, his door chimed. He opened it to find Linux standing there, her skin glowing with a soft, pulsating light. "Linux?" he said, surprised. "You're looking well. How are you feeling?" She stepped inside, her movements fluid and graceful. "Much better, thanks to our medical technology, and thanks to you." Stephen felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm just glad you're okay. Your sacrifice, it meant a lot." Linux's skin flashed with a pattern Stephen had never seen before. It was beautiful, intricate, and clearly conveyed deep emotion. "Stephen," she said, her voice soft, "I need to tell you something." Before she could continue, Stephen's comm unit beeped urgently. "I'm sorry," he said, moving to answer it. "Just a moment." The face of Admiral Cho appeared on the screen. "Stephen, we're sending a delegation to Zeta 9, scientists, diplomats, and a xenobiologist named Dr. Marcus Reeves. I want you to work closely with him. He's got some interesting theories about human-Ladosian relations." Stephen acknowledged the order, his mind racing with the implications. As he turned back to Linux, he found her watching him intently, her skin still pulsing with that mesmerizing pattern. "Linux," he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I understand," she said. "Your duties come first, but we will continue this conversation soon." As she left, Stephen couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation and unease about what lay ahead. The arrival of the Earth delegation brought new energy to Zeta 9. Dr. Marcus Reeves, a tall man with piercing eyes and an eager demeanor, sought out Stephen almost immediately. "Fascinating," Reeves muttered, watching a group of young Ladosians attempt to play a human game of soccer in one of the station's recreational areas. "They're adopting our behaviors so quickly. Have you noticed any physiological changes?" Stephen shook his head. "Nothing beyond what they can control with their bioluminescence, but the cultural shift is undeniable." Reeves nodded, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "And what about you, Stephen? Any personal experiences with Ladosian culture?" Stephen felt a flush creep up his neck, remembering Linux's visit and the intensity of her bioluminescent display. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said carefully. Reeves leaned in closer. "I've heard rumors about you and a certain Ladosian named Linux. The potential for studying interspecies compatibility is unprecedented." Before Stephen could respond, Commander Zrix approached, his skin pulsing with barely concealed agitation. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice clipped, "I need to speak with Stephen about security protocols." As Reeves walked away, Zrix turned to Stephen. "We've implemented new measures to monitor human activities on the station. It's necessary for everyone's safety." Stephen frowned. "That could create tension with the delegation. We need to be careful not to undo the progress we've made." Zrix's skin flickered with frustration. "Your people are changing ours, Stephen. Some of our elders are concerned about the erosion of our way of life." Stephen spent the next few days mediating conflicts between the human delegation and the Ladosian security forces. The work was delicate, requiring all of his diplomatic skills to smooth over misunderstandings and build trust. During a rare moment of quiet, Stephen found himself in one of the station's observatories, gazing out at the star-filled expanse. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Linux approaching. "I hoped I'd find you here," she said, her skin glowing softly in the dimly lit room. "We never finished our conversation." Stephen felt his heart rate increase. "Linux, She moved closer, her bioluminescence intensifying. "I know you've noticed the changes in my patterns when I'm around you. It's not just gratitude, Stephen. It's more than that." Before Stephen could respond, the observatory door slid open. Dr. Shindra, a Ladosian scientist Stephen had met briefly, entered with a group of colleagues. "Ah, Stephen," Shindra said, her skin pulsing with excitement. "Just the human we wanted to see. We have a proposal for you, one that could change everything for both our species." Stephen looked from Shindra to Linux, feeling the weight of both his professional duties and his personal feelings. He knew that whatever came next would have far-reaching consequences for human-Ladosian relations, and for his own future on Zeta 9. Stephen's mind raced as he processed Dr. Zindra's words. A proposal that could change everything? He glanced at Linux, noting the subtle shifts in her bioluminescence that betrayed her curiosity. Before he could respond, his comm unit vibrated with an encrypted message from Earth Command. Excusing himself, Stephen stepped aside to read the message. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. Earth Command had uncovered evidence of a rogue human-Ladosian hybrid experiment on Zeta 9. They tasked him with investigating discreetly and gathering concrete proof. Stephen's training kicked in. He maintained a neutral expression as he turned back to Dr. Zindra and her colleagues. "I'm intrigued by your proposal," he said smoothly, "but I'll need time to consider its implications. Perhaps we could discuss this further tomorrow?" As the Ladosian scientist filed out, Stephen caught Linux's eye. She approached him, her skin pulsing with concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Stephen hesitated, weighing his options. He needed an ally, someone he could trust implicitly. And who better than Linux? "Not here," he murmured. "Meet me in Maintenance Corridor B in an hour. We need to talk." The next few days were a whirlwind of covert activity. Stephen, with Linux's invaluable assistance, pieced together fragments of information from various sources across the station. They discovered discrepancies in supply requisitions, power consumption anomalies, and whispered rumors among the station's staff. Their investigation led them to a restricted section of Zeta 9, ostensibly a waste processing facility. But Stephen's instincts, honed by years of diplomatic work, told him there was more to it. "Look at these power readings," he whispered to Linux as they huddled over a datapad in his quarters. "They're far too high for simple waste processing." Linux's skin flickered with agreement. "And the supply manifests. Some of these chemicals are used in advanced genetic research." Stephen nodded grimly. "We need to get in there. But how?" Linux's bioluminescence pulsed with commitment. "I have level 3 security clearance. If we time it right, I could get us access during a maintenance cycle." The plan they devised was risky but elegant in its simplicity. Linux would use her clearance to initiate a routine maintenance check, allowing them to enter the restricted area without raising suspicion. As they prepared for their mission, Stephen couldn't help but notice the changes in Linux's bioluminescent patterns. Her skin pulsed with a mix of excitement and anxiety, the intricate patterns more vibrant than he'd ever seen. It spoke volumes about her emotional investment in their shared goal. The day of their infiltration arrived. Stephen's heart raced as Linux led him through the security checkpoints, her demeanor outwardly calm despite the rapid flickering of light beneath her skin. Once inside, they quickly realized the true nature of the facility. State-of-the-art genetic research equipment filled the lab, a blend of human and Ladosian technology working in harmony. A small team of scientists, both human and Ladosian, worked with intense focus. Stephen's breath caught as he recognized one of the human scientists. "Dr. Elena Petrova," he whispered to Linux. "She was supposed to have died in a lab accident on Earth years ago." They moved carefully through the lab, gathering data and visual evidence. Stephen's stomach churned as he read through research logs detailing failed hybrid embryo experiments. But recent entries suggested a breakthrough, a single embryo showing signs of stable development. "This is bigger than we thought," Stephen murmured, his voice tight with concern. "We need to find that embryo." They located the containment unit housing the developing hybrid, its security measures a testament to its importance. As they examined it, a voice cut through the air. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you." Stephen and Linux whirled around to find Dr. Petrova and a Ladosian scientist watching them. The Ladosian skin pulsed with patterns Stephen didn't recognize, but the hostility was clear. "Dr. Stephen," Petrova said, her voice surprisingly calm, "I should have known Earth would send someone to investigate, but I didn't expect to see you working so closely with a Ladosian." The Ladosian scientist, introduced as Dr. Zalos, stepped forward. "You must understand the importance of our work. This hybrid embryo represents the future of both our species. Imagine the possibilities. Beings adapted to thrive in the harshest environments of space, combining the best traits of humans and Ladosians." Stephen's mind raced, weighing the potential benefits against the ethical implications and the very real danger of such technology being misused. "And who decides how these hybrids are used?" he challenged. "Who controls their creation?" Before either scientist could respond, alarms blared throughout the lab. Dr. Petrova's eyes narrowed. "You've triggered our security protocols. I'm disappointed, Stephen. We could have worked together on this." The sound of approaching security forces echoed through the corridors. Stephen knew they had only moments before they'd be discovered. He locked eyes with Linux, saw the tenacity in her bioluminescent patterns, and made a split-second decision. He lunged for the nearest console, fingers flying over the controls as he initiated an emergency quarantine protocol. Blast doors slammed shut, sealing them inside the lab. "What are you doing?" Dr. Zelos demanded, his skin flashing with anger. "Buying us time," Stephen replied grimly. He turned to Linux. "We need to secure that embryo and download all the research data. Can you handle the download while I deal with the containment unit?" Linux nodded, her skin pulsing with resolute patterns. As they worked, the rogue scientists attempted to interfere, trying to destroy evidence and prevent the embryo's removal. In the ensuing struggle, equipment was damaged. Alarms blared as atmospheric regulators failed, releasing toxic gases used in the genetic experiments. Everyone in the lab scrambled for emergency breathing apparatus. Stephen's mind raced, assessing their options. The lab's defenses wouldn't hold forever against the security forces outside. They needed a way out, and fast. His eyes fell on a schematic of the lab's emergency systems. An idea formed. Risky, potentially disastrous, but their best shot at escape. "Linux," he called out, his voice muffled by the breathing mask. "The evacuation system for hazardous materials. We can use it to get out of here with the embryo and the data." As they prepared for their daring escape, Stephen noticed something alarming. Linux's bioluminescence was fluctuating wildly, her movements becoming unsteady. The prolonged exposure to the lab's chemicals seemed to be affecting her biology in unexpected ways. Stephen faced a critical decision. They had the evidence they needed, but Linux's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The security forces were moments away from breaching the lab, and the rogue scientists, though temporarily subdued, remained a threat. With the countdown to their escape ticking away, Stephen knew his next actions would shape the future of human-Ladosian relations, the fate of interspecies genetic research, and his relationship with Linux. The weight of it all pressed down on him as he prepared to make his move. Stephen's mind raced as he weighed his options. The lab's emergency evacuation system was their best chance for escape. He turned to Linux, noting the erratic fluctuations in her bioluminescence. "We're using the hazardous material removal chute," he explained quickly. "It's risky, but it's our only way out." Linux nodded, her movements unsteady. Stephen secured the hybrid embryo's containment unit in the data drive with the downloaded research. He helped Linux into the evacuation pod, his concern growing as he noticed her skin's unusual texture. The pod sealed with a hiss. Stephen activated the launch sequence, and suddenly they were hurtling through the narrow chute. The G-forces pressed them back as they twisted and turned through the station's infrastructure. With a jarring thud, the pod came to a stop in a maintenance tunnel. Stephen forced the hatch open and climbed out, pulling Linux with him. The embryo container felt heavy in his arms as he supported his weakening companion. "Stay with me, Linux," he urged, guiding her through the dim corridor. "We need to keep moving." They navigated the maze-like tunnels, Stephen's diplomatic training kicking in as he quickly memorized their path. Distant shouts and the pounding of feet echoed through the station. Security was on high alert. Linux stumbled, her skin pulsing with alarming patterns. "Stephen," she gasped. "Something's wrong. My body, it's changing." Stephen's heart raced as he noticed the subtle shifts in Linux's skin color and texture. The lab's chemicals had triggered some kind of metamorphosis, a biological process he'd never seen in Ladosian physiology. They rounded a corner and found themselves face-to-face with the security team. Stephen reacted instantly, pulling Linux into a side passage. They sprinted down the narrow corridor, the sound of pursuit close behind. "Lockdown protocol initiated," a computerized voice announced over the station's comm system. "All sections will be sealed in 5 minutes." Stephen's mind worked furiously, mapping out potential escape routes. He spotted a maintenance hatch and quickly ushered Linux inside. They crawled through the cramped space, emerging in a dimly lit storage area. Linux collapsed against a stack of crates, her breathing labored. Stephen set down the embryo container and rummaged through the storage units, searching for anything that might help. "Here," he said, finding an emergency medical kit. He administered a stabilizing agent, hoping it would slow whatever was happening to Linux's biology. "This should help, but we need to find you proper medical attention." Lennox's skin flickered with gratitude, but her condition continued to deteriorate. Stephen helped her to her feet, shouldering the embryo container once more. They pressed on, narrowly avoiding security patrols. Stephen's human adaptability allowed him to quickly adjust their route when faced with sealed sections or Ladosian tracking technology. As they passed through a communication hub, Stephen saw an opportunity. He activated a console, fingers flying over the controls as he composed an encrypted message to Dr. Marcus Reeves. Dr. Reeves, urgent situation. Illegal hybrid research uncovered. Linux affected by unknown chemical agent. Need immediate assistance, evading security. Will attempt to reach docking bay 7, Stephen. He sent the message, praying it would reach Reeves in time. They continued their desperate flight through the station's underbelly. Suddenly they encountered a group of young Ladosians huddled in a maintenance alcove. Stephen tensed, ready to run, but one of the youths stepped forward, skin pulsing with recognition. "You're Stephen, the human diplomat," the young Ladosian said. "We've heard stories about you. Are you in trouble?" Stephen hesitated, then nodded. "We need help. Security is after us." The youths exchanged glances, their skin flickering with excitement. "We'll create a diversion," another said. "It's the least we can do for the human who's done so much for our people." Grateful for their assistance, Stephen guided Lennox onward as the young Ladosians scattered, drawing security's attention away from their position. Lennox's condition worsened. Her skin now rippled with unfamiliar patterns, and she struggled to stay conscious. Stephen's muscles burned as he supported her weight along with the embryo container, but he pushed through the pain. They navigated through increasingly treacherous terrain, climbing through half-assembled corridors and squeezing past humming power conduits. Stephen's human endurance was pushed to its limits. A violent tremor shook the station. Stephen steadied himself against a wall, realizing with horror that security was using phase-shifting technology to bypass physical barriers. Their pursuers were getting closer. They reached a junction where the path split. One route led to the human sector, where Stephen might find allies among his own people. The other led to a restricted Ladosian medical facility, possibly Lennox's only hope for survival. As Stephen weighed his options, the embryo container beeped ominously. The stasis field was failing. The hybrid life form inside needed immediate attention. Before he could decide, a commotion erupted from a nearby docking bay. Stephen recognized Dr. Reeves's voice amid the chaos. The xenobiologist had arrived with a team, ready to help, but security forces were converging on their position. Stephen looked at the unconscious Lennox in his arms, then at the unstable embryo container. The station's alarms blared, and he could hear security teams approaching from multiple directions. Whatever he decided would change the course of human-Ladosian relations forever. With a deep breath, Stephen made his choice. He activated his comm unit, hailing Dr. Reeves's team. "Marcus, this is Stephen. I'm sending you my location. Lennox needs emergency medical attention, and the embryo's stasis field is failing. We'll meet you halfway. Be ready to run." As Stephen spoke, he was already moving, carrying Lennox and the precious embryo toward an uncertain future. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and the next few minutes would determine whether their daring escape would end in triumph or tragedy. Stephen's muscles screamed in protest as he hefted Lennox's limp form in the embryo container, his decision made in a heartbeat. The restricted Ladosian medical facility loomed ahead, a sanctuary of gleaming metal and pulsing bioluminescent panels. As he staggered through the entrance, a group of Ladosian medical staff turned, their skin flashing with shock and suspicion. Stephen's breath came in ragged gasps as he addressed them. "Please, help her," he managed, his arms trembling under the weight of his precious cargo. A tall Ladosian doctor stepped forward, his skin rippling with cautious curiosity. "What happened to her?" Before Stephen could respond, the doors burst open again. Dr. Reeves rushed in, flanked by his team, their faces flushed from exertion. "Chemical exposure," Reeves explained quickly, his eyes darting between Lennox and the embryo container. "Unknown compound. It's triggering unprecedented changes in her physiology." The Ladosian doctor's skin pulsed with intrigue. He barked orders to his staff, and suddenly the room was a flurry of activity. Linux was gently lifted onto a hovering stretcher, her skin now an alarming kaleidoscope of shifting patterns. And this? Another Ladosian scientist gestured to the embryo container, which emitted an ominous series of beeps. "Hybrid embryo," Stephen said, his voice hoarse. "The stasis field is failing." The Ladosian geneticist's eyes widened, his skin flickering with a mix of shock and excitement. "Bring it here, quickly!" As Linux was rushed into an adjacent room, Stephen handed the embryo container to Dr. Reeves. The xenobiologist and the Ladosian geneticist huddled over it, their fingers flying across control panels as they worked to stabilize the fragile life form within. Stephen moved to follow Linux, but a firm hand on his shoulder stopped him. He turned to find Commander Zrix flanked by a squad of security officers, their weapons raised. "You're under arrest," Zrix growled, his skin pulsing with anger. "Hand over all materials related to this illegal operation immediately." Dr. Reeves stepped between them, his face set in persistence. "Commander, with all due respect, we're in the middle of a medical emergency and a potentially groundbreaking scientific discovery. Arresting us now could jeopardize both." The Ladosian doctor treating Linux emerged from the treatment room, his skin rippling with excitement. "Commander, you need to see this. The human speaks the truth. We're witnessing something extraordinary." Zrix hesitated, his skin flickering with indecision. After a tense moment, he lowered his weapon. "Explain." The doctor led them to a view screen overlooking Linux's treatment chamber. Stephen's breath caught in his throat as he saw her. Linux's skin was shifting, not just in color and pattern, but in texture. It seemed to be adapting, changing at a cellular level. "The chemical exposure has activated a dormant genetic sequence," the doctor explained, his voice filled with awe. "It's altering her biology, making it more compatible with human physiology." Stephen's mind reeled at the implications. He turned to Dr. Reeves, who was monitoring the embryo's status. "Marcus, could this be related to the hybrid research?" Reeves nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the readouts. "It's possible. This could be the key to successful human Ladosian hybridization, a naturally occurring adaptation rather than artificial manipulation." Commander Zrix's skin pulsed with a complex mix of emotions. "This is unprecedented. I need to inform the High Council immediately." As Zrix stepped away to make his report, Stephen's attention was drawn to a commotion outside the medical facility. A group of young Ladosians, the same ones who had helped him earlier, were gathered, their skin flashing with patterns of protest. "Let them work," one shouted, her voice carrying through the facility's entrance. "Humans are our friends, not our enemies." Stephen watched as more Ladosians joined the group, their numbers swelling. He could see the conflict playing out across the station, some Ladosians embracing the possibility of closer human relations, others recoiling from it. Inside the facility, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Ladosian and human scientists worked side by side, monitoring Linux's condition and studying the stabilized embryo. Stephen moved between them, offering what help he could, his diplomatic training kicking in as he mediated minor disagreements and facilitated communication. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Stephen refused to leave, even as exhaustion tugged at him. He stood vigil by Linux's containment unit, watching the slow, steady changes in her biology. "You should rest," Dr. Reeves said softly, appearing at his side. Stephen shook his head. "I can't leave her." Reeves smiled tiredly. "I understand, but you're no good to her if you collapse. At least sit down for a while." Reluctantly, Stephen sank into a nearby chair. As he did, he noticed Commander Zrix watching him, the Ladosian's skin pulsing with a pattern Stephen had never seen before, something akin to respect. Zrix approached, his posture less rigid than before. "Your dedication to your colleague is admirable," he said, the words seeming to surprise even him. "Perhaps we have misjudged humans' capacity for loyalty." Before Stephen could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. He leapt to his feet, adrenaline surging through his weary body. "What's happening?" he demanded. The Ladosian doctor monitoring Linux's vitals looked up, his skin pulsing with excitement and trepidation. "She's waking up," he announced, "and her transformation, it's accelerating." Stephen rushed to the containment unit, pressing his hand against the transparent barrier. Lennox's eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with an intensity that took his breath away. Her skin rippled with patterns he had never seen before, but somehow understood perfectly. She was changing, evolving, and with her the future of human-Ladosian relations hung in the balance. As if in response to Lennox's awakening, the hybrid embryo's containment unit emitted a series of rapid beeps. Dr. Reeves and the Ladosian geneticist hurried to check its status. "Incredible," the geneticist breathed, his skin pulsing with awe. "The embryo's development has accelerated exponentially. It's as if it's responding to Lennox's transformation," Reeves finished, his eyes wide with wonder. Stephen looked between Lennox and the embryo, a realization dawning. This was more than just a scientific breakthrough or a diplomatic crisis. It was the beginning of something entirely new, a potential fusion of their species that could reshape the future of both. As the implications of these developments rippled through the station, Stephen knew that the challenges ahead would test not just his diplomatic skills, but the very foundations of human-Ladosian coexistence. With Lennox's awakening and the embryo's accelerated growth, they had entered uncharted territory, filled with both promise and peril. The next few hours would be crucial. Earth's diplomatic envoy was en route, the Ladosian High Council was in emergency session, and the station buzzed with tension and excitement. Stephen steeled himself for the battles to come, not with weapons, but with words, ideas, and the power of understanding. As he watched Lennox slowly sit up, her newly transformed eyes meeting his with a mix of confusion and recognition, Stephen knew that their journey was just the beginning. It was, in many ways, just beginning. The beginning of a new chapter in human-Ladosian relations. The facility's comm system crackled to life, interrupting Stephen's thoughts. "Attention all personnel, the Earth diplomatic envoy has docked. Key representatives are en route to the medical facility." Stephen straightened, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance after hours of vigil. He turned to Commander Zrix, who nodded tersely. "We must present a united front," Zrix said, his skin pulsing with a mix of apprehension and purpose. As they prepared for the diplomat's arrival, Lennox's containment unit began to emit a soft, pulsating glow. The light intensified, shifting through a spectrum of colors that Stephen had never seen before. He pressed closer to the transparent barrier, his heart racing. "Doctor," he called out, "something's happening." The Ladosian medical team rushed to the unit, their skin flickering with patterns of intense concentration as they analyzed the readings. Stephen watched in awe as Lennox's features began to subtly shift. Her skin, once purely Ladosian, now took on a texture that seemed to bridge the gap between their species. It retained its bioluminescent properties, but now appeared more pliable, almost human-like in its consistency. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the containment unit. Stephen's breath caught in his throat as Lennox's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the solid, glowing orbs he had known. Instead, they were a striking blend of Ladosian luminescence and human structure, with distinct irises and pupils that seemed to hold the secrets of both their worlds. Without thinking, Stephen placed his hand on the containment unit's surface. Lennox's gaze locked onto his, and in that moment, he felt a connection so profound it seemed to transcend physical barriers. The Ladosian doctor's voice cut through Stephen's reverie. "Her vital signs are stabilizing. I think the transformation is complete." As if in response to his words, the containment unit's shield began to lower. Lennox sat up, her body radiating an ethereal glow that captivated everyone in the room. Humans and Ladosians alike stood transfixed, the differences between their species seeming insignificant in the face of this extraordinary development. Stephen stepped forward, his voice soft with wonder. "Lennox, can you hear me?" She turned to him, her new eyes focusing with an intensity that made his breath catch. When she spoke, her voice carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate on a frequency that touched both human and Ladosian senses. "Stephen," she said, her tone filled with warmth and something deeper, a profound understanding that hinted at experiences beyond their current reality. "I saw so much." Before Stephen could respond, The doors to the medical facility slid open. The Earth diplomatic envoy entered, led by Ambassador Chen, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. "What in the world?" she began, but Lennox's voice, now stronger, cut through the room. "Not just our world, Ambassador," Lennox said, her skin pulsing with patterns that somehow translated into emotions even the humans could intuitively understand. "I've seen a future. Our future. Together." Lennox began to describe vivid visions she had experienced during her transformation. She spoke of gleaming cities where humans and Ladosians lived and worked side by side, their complementary strengths driving innovations in technology and art. She described massive starships, products of their combined ingenuity, pushing the boundaries of known space. "I saw us standing together on distant worlds," Lennox continued, her voice filled with awe. "Our differences became our greatest strength. We achieved things neither species could have done alone." As Lennox spoke, Stephen noticed the expressions around the room shifting. The initial shock and apprehension on the diplomats' faces gave way to intrigue and cautious hope. Even Commander Zerix's skin pulsed with patterns Stephen interpreted as grudging fascination. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her measured tone. "These visions are compelling, but we must consider the practical implications, the political ramifications alone." "With all due respect, Ambassador," Dr. Reeves interjected, gesturing toward the hybrid embryos container, "I believe we're beyond political considerations. We're witnessing the birth of a new scientific frontier." The Ladosian geneticist nodded in agreement. "The potential benefits of this genetic compatibility are immeasurable. We would be fools to ignore this opportunity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled scientists, both human and Ladosian. Ambassador Chen exchanged glances with her Ladosian counterpart, who had remained silent until now. The Ladosian ambassador's skin rippled with thoughtful patterns as he spoke. Perhaps it is time for a new approach, a joint initiative to explore these possibilities in a controlled, ethical manner." Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. "A specialized research team with oversight from both our governments. It could work, assuming we can agree on the parameters." As the diplomats began to discuss the logistics, Stephen felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to find Lennox standing beside him, steady on her feet despite her recent transformation. "We did it," she said softly, her new eyes searching his face. "We've opened the door to something incredible." Stephen smiled, feeling a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. "We've only just begun," he replied, realizing the truth of his words as he spoke them. Over the next few hours, as the diplomats hammered out the initial framework for their joint research initiative, Stephen found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. He and Lennox were appointed to lead the new team, their unique experiences and connection making them the ideal candidates to bridge the gap between their species. The hybrid embryo, now developing at an accelerated rate, was placed under their care. Plans were made to construct a specialized artificial womb, ensuring the child would be born into a world ready to embrace its unique heritage. As the day wore on, Stephen noticed Commander Zrix approaching. The Ladosian's posture was less rigid than usual, his skin pulsing with what Stephen now recognized as a pattern of respect. "I've been authorized to drop all charges against you," Zrix said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Moreover, I've been assigned to head security for this new joint initiative. It seems my experience will be valuable in ensuring the safety and ethical compliance of your work." Stephen extended his hand, a gesture he knew Zrix would understand. After a moment's hesitation, the Ladosian clasped it firmly. "I look forward to working with you, Commander," Stephen said, sensing the beginning of an unlikely but potentially powerful alliance. As the initial flurry of activity began to settle, Stephen found a moment of quiet with Lennox. They stood together, looking out at the stars through a viewport in the medical facility. "What happens now?" Stephen asked, feeling both exhilarated and overwhelmed by the rapid changes. Lennox's skin illuminated with patterns of contentment and excitement. "Now," she said, her new voice carrying notes of both her old self and something entirely new. "We start exploring this future I've seen. Together." Stephen nodded, realizing that their journey, and the journey of their two species, was only just beginning. As Zeta-9 hummed with the energy of new possibilities, he knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but filled with incredible potential. The stars seemed to shine brighter as Stephen and Linux stood side by side, their unique bond a testament to the possibilities that lay ahead. In their unity, they embodied the promise of a future where the boundaries between their species blurred, replaced by a shared vision of discovery and understanding.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.